Hello, this is Marion from Wool Thread Paint here, and today I'm doing a little video tutorial just to show you how I go about doing this stitch here, which I have used in my Christmas blanket, which is called the Winter Season Blanket. The reason I've used this stitch in here is because I wanted to bring in a sort of candy cane red and white striped effect going round the blanket, and I came up with this idea. This stitch is a block stitch, which many of you will be familiar with, but it's done in two colours so that you get alternating the red and the cream. Now I've done the red and cream on two sides, and then on the other two sides I'm using these colours because I've used them in the centre and I want to bring them out as well. This is Deramore's Studio DK, and this colour is green tea, and this one is cranberry. Yes, cranberry. So I'll just take the ball band off this one just now. And I'm going to start with the green tea. Now, if you're following the pattern, which you will be, this particular video is purely and simply to run alongside the pattern for the blanket, which is available to buy on Etsy. It's not really intended as a standalone video in its own right, but just every so often when you're working on the pattern, it is quite nice sometimes to have something to look at in real terms rather than just trying to read the instructions. So that's what I'm doing today. Now, this block stitch does not go round the corners. It comes up to the edge of the blanket and stops, and then the next section starts here because I'm going to put a different square. I'll see if I can find it. This square of a granny square will fit in that corner, so that the block stitch is going to be worked up to it and then worked along from it. The downside of block stitch, which I think is really just a small downside, is the fact that you have to work each row from the right hand side to the left. You can't turn it and work back, especially not when you're using two colours. I have in fact used it. I've done block stitch on this part as well, which is a single colour, and you can turn and work back the way with that. But when you're working with the two colours, you really need to work in one direction, which means that you end up with a lot of ends. But it's not the biggest problem in the world, just easy enough to sew in. I think that would probably take about 5 minutes to sew these in. So I'm going to start with the green tea, and I'm going to start in the corner of this large square here. This was a square that fitted in on the previous two rounds, and it has this corner, which is where we're going to start working. So I'm going to attach my yarn into that corner. You'll find that the block stitch in two colours is only really a problem at the very beginning because you seem to have so many different ends to hold. But once you're past that, it's quite straightforward. Actually, this is the foundation row for the block stitch. So I've joined my yarn and I'm going to chain one, and then I'm going to make one double crochet, or in US terms that's single crochet, into that same corner space, and that's us started. Now this, as I say, is the foundation row, so we're not using two colours in this one, just the one. I'm going to chain two quite loosely. Don't make it, if you tend to chain very tightly, make it chain three, and then I'm going to find the next space and make a double crochet again, or single crochet, chain two and double crochet in the next space, chain 2 and double crochet in the next space, and you're going to work all the way along, and when you get to the end I'll be there to show you how to stop that row. So if you want to pause the video just now and come back when you've got to almost the end of the row, which, remember, will be the corner of the heart square. Don't go any further out, just stop at that point. So I'll see you when you get to that point. But just let me say, first of all, that you will come across certain points where there is a join between two squares, and you don't want to put in too many stitches in there. As I said, this is basically the foundation row, and all we're doing is we're creating a little loop in order to make your trebles for the next row. So when you get to this point, my suggestion is to, instead of going into a corner space on either side, I'm just going to pierce between the two squares underneath that last joining stitch for the silver and make a double crochet and then chain 2. You need to be very loose on this bit because you have a little bit of a jump, but I don't think it's really necessary to chain 3 because that just makes it a little bit loose. So I've jumped over that join there. So I'll see you at the end. Here I am at the end of the row, and I have put in the double crochet into the last space before the corner, and then all you need to do is make your double crochet in the corner, and you can then snip your yarn and finish off. So that is the foundation row, and although it looks a bit strange at the moment, really only the little V shape of the double crochet will show once you do the subsequent rows. So now I'm going back to the beginning, and I'm going to start with the darker colour, which is the cranberry, and find my end. This that's it, and I've still got the green tea. So as I say, we're working with both these colours, and there is a tendency, unless you think about it, for the colours to twist, and you get this kind of thing happening where they all twist together, and every so often you've got to stop and untwist them. But there's a simple remedy for that, which I'll show you when I start working. So I'm going to take, as I say, this dark colour, and I'm going to go into that bit where we did the first, just where we did our first chain 1 and double crochet, and I'm going to attach my yarn. If you hear an odd pitter-pattering in the background, it's because I'm up in the studio this afternoon to try and get some decent light. It's a terrible day outside. We have the storm Francis howling outside, and the rain is battering off the windows. I'm very glad to be indoors and not out in that today. Right, I'm just going to push these out the way. This was a bit of a long end, so I'll just push that out the way. Right, now we're working with trebles. So in UK term, treble crochet stitch. In US term, double crochet. So we're going to chain 2. That's my preference to take me up to the height of the treble. I know some people like to chain 3, but for me, I prefer 2. You can do whatever you want to do. So I've started this, and then I'm going to look for, you can see that there is a space your chain 2 from the previous row and the row below creates that nice space to work in. So we're going to treble once, twice, and a third time, but at this point we're going to stop when there are still 2 loops on the hook and take our second colour. This is the way we're going to join the colours each time. You join on the last stitch of the previous colour. So we're going to loop that through quite simply, bend it over and loop it through. This is the only point where you maybe feel that you need an extra pair of hands, because you want to keep the tension reasonably tight, and we're actually going to start the next group of 3 trebles and work it in the green tea, but at the same time this cranberry is going to lie along the top so that it's ready to pick up for the next group. So in underneath those chain 2 from the previous row and make your first treble, and then a second treble, and then a third, and at this point stop. Now we've got 2 yarns. We've got the red and the green, and I'm just going to always keep my green to the front and my red to the back. When I'm doing the cream and red border, I always keep the cream. It's just the way I've always remembered it. So I keep this to the front and the red to the back. So this is sitting at the back. I'm going to finish off that previous stitch, just give everything a nice little tight pull, and then into the next space with the cranberry. 2 trebles, third one, stop at that point, and as I said, the green is at the front, so I'm going to start my next one, and you do get into a reasonable rhythm with this. So we're picking up going underneath the chain 2 from the previous row, and this is at the back, so we're going to pull that through and continue. Now there's not really a great deal that you can do to disguise the tiny little bit of colour that's being carried along the back. You can pull it a little bit firmly to make it smaller, but you do still see the odd little bit now and again, but for me that's not a major problem. You can see it in this one as well, but it tends to be fairly even, and really it's part of the pattern. So yarn over, have your red lying on the top of the chain 2, make your first treble, second treble, and third, and this is at the back, remember the red goes at the back, so it starts ready to do the next one. And as you can see, my yarn is sitting nicely, it's not tangling, which it would happen if you didn't really think about front and back, and you can rattle along pretty quickly. Yep, the green's at the front, finish off, and so on. And there we have, we can just do a little push and pull. There we have the first part of the stripe. So you'll work all the way along, and then I'll show you what happens at the end, and we can continue with the next part. Right, we've worked all the way along, and we've come to the last chain 2 space for us to work the last group of trebles. Now, although we started with cranberry, the last group of trebles will be the green tea. And I've worked 2 of them, and I'm going to work my third, and this time complete it. We're not going to be changing colour. So that's 3. Now there's 1 more stitch to do before we get to the very end, and that is in this bumpy looking bit where we started our or where we put in fact it was the end of the foundation row, I want you to just push your hook as best you can into that column. I'm going to try, what you want to do is try and pick up more than one loop just for security. There we go. And I'm going to make a final treble crochet. So there's actually 4 with a small gap at the end of the row. And now it's time to cut it, but just before you do, keep your hook in. I want you to look for 3 things that might be going on, just in case there's a mistake. First of all, just have a look along your row to make sure that it is 1 red, 1 green, 1 red, 1 green, because if you're watching TV or talking to somebody, sometimes it's possible to end up with 2 of one colour together, and that throws out the pattern. The other thing I want you to look at is the back, and make sure that your travelling colour each time is underneath the stitches, because if you've forgotten to hold it on top of your chain 2 row and then work over it, you'll have a long line of one colour behind. It's not hugely a problem, it just would be more noticeable on the back than if it had been worked in. And the third thing is that you have got the correct number of groups of 3 trebles. In other words, you want to make sure that between each treble you've got the little pointed double crochet, so that you haven't pushed 2 trebles together in between the 2 double crochets, which would then end up with too many stitches. So you're jumping over the double crochet stitch each time going into the next chain 2 space, and that's your first row. Now you're going to do another foundation row, which again is a double crochet at the beginning, chain 2, well in fact it will be chain 2, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, and you want to just find that little space between the 2 colours to make your double crochet. I'll start that. I'll just cut this off. That's why you can see that we have quite a lot of ends at one end, or at both ends in fact, but you can finish off your green from the previous end, and we'll start the foundation stitch for the next block. So in between there, which is where we started before, we started with chain 2 and then the first 3 trebles, so we've got a little space between the chain 2 and the trebles, and I'm going to put in my yarn. Again, it's still going to be green tea, and I'm going to chain 1 and then 1 double crochet in that space, chain 2 and a double crochet in the next space between the trebles, and work all the way along, finish off your yarn and then come back to the beginning, and you'll start with your chain 2 within the cranberry in this little space here, and then 3 as just, you'll do exactly the same thing, so you're using the same sequence of colours as the previous row, and that's what gives you this striped effect. If it had been simple granny stitch, as you know, the granny trebles sit, they're not immediately above one another, so you would have got a zigzag, and I wanted to have the straight stripe, which is why we're doing block stitch. So it's another, as I say, another foundation row, another row of trebles, another foundation row, and another row of trebles, and that's you done your 3 rows. The next section is the block stitch again, 3 more rows of block stitch in this cranberry, and this time you can work along to the end and then turn and come back, because we're not worried about a front and a back particularly. But that's all explained in the pattern. I hope you have fun doing this stitch. It really does look lovely as it works up, and I'm very happy with it in the blanket. So bye for now.